I am the Ascended Master Jesus Christ, and I would like to begin by making a confession. We of the Ascended Masters are in some ways like used car salesmen who use a particular selling technique called bait and switch. The idea is you put a big sign on the car lot announcing some car model you are selling very cheap. And then when the people come in, you say, unfortunately, we just sold the last one. But we have this other model that we can get you a good deal on. To some degree, that is what we have to do. And I want to explain to you why this is so. Now, you might ask a simple question. Here is a group of people who are not only believing that I am the Ascended Master Jesus Christ speaking through a human being, but you are experiencing in your hearts the living proof of this. Why is there not thousands or millions of those who call themselves Christians who are willing to listen to my living word? The reason for this is that they have created such images, such expectations, such conditions in their minds that for them to accept, number one, that I still exist in a higher realm, number two, that I am willing to speak to humankind, and number three, that I am speaking to humankind, they would have to overcome all of these conditions. However, they are not willing to let go of these conditions. And that means that their conditions form a filter, so that if I were to speak to them, I would have to live up to all of their conditions, so that they could accept what I am saying, or even that I'm saying anything. And so naturally, it would be completely impossible for me to live up to the conditions of Catholics, fundamentalist Christians, or Lutherans, and still be able to express anything new. They are so focused on the past, what they believe was said in the past, and what their churches for centuries have put on this of interpretations. There are so many layers of interpretations, or we might say distortions, of my original words and teachings, that most Christians are so trapped in this that they will say, if I do not live up to the conditions defined by their church, then I cannot be the real Jesus Christ. But if I were to live up to all of these conditions, what could I say? Absolutely nothing, my beloved. For they do not need me or want me to say anything. They are satisfied with all their interpretations. And so you see, this is the basic dilemma we face on earth. How are we as Ascended Masters going to help unascended human beings? If your present level of consciousness was sufficient for you to enter heaven, enter the spiritual realm, well, then we would have to do nothing. But if your present level of consciousness was sufficient for you to enter heaven, then why aren't you in heaven? So the simple fact is that your present level of consciousness is not sufficient. And so if we are to help you, we have to give you something that is beyond your present mental box, your present filter. And if you use your present filter to reject anything that is beyond that filter, we are stuck. We are bound by the law of free will. We cannot force you. Now, what this really means is that when we seek to help people, and of course we seek to help everyone in some way or another, we have to go in and we have to look at a specific group of people. We have to look at their level of consciousness. We have to look at their image of the world, their view of the world. We have to look at their expectations, and then we are not trying to give them some highest or absolute truth. We are simply looking at what is the next step for them. What is the next step up in their evolution? And how can we help them make that leap, take that quantum leap to the next level? Never mind that there may be 143 levels above their level. This has no value for them because they cannot leap from the first to the 144th level. They have to leap from the first to the second, or from the 48th to the 49th. And so we have to look at this, and this is where the bait and switch analogy comes in, because you understand that for anyone to do anything new, anything differently, for anyone to accept any kind of teaching, spiritual, mystical, what have you, they have to have a motivation. And their motivation will be based on their current level of consciousness, their current worldview, their current expectations. What motivates these people? What is it they want that they don't have now? And can we then use that to give them that idea, that teaching that can help them take the next step? And this is what we have to do with everyone, my beloved. As Lord Krishna expressed yesterday, there are people who are only ready for devotion, for a devotional path. And so he does not attempt to give them a teaching that they cannot grasp. He simply reflects back the devotion they sent at him, and this will, in the long run, help them grow to the next level. And then in some future lifetime, they may be able to grasp a higher teaching. But we are not attempting to give people more than we evaluate that they can handle. Now, the reason I'm telling you this as Ascended Master students is that this can help you walk the path of Christhood. Because when you have walked the path for a while, you will have made progress. You will have raised yourself above the level of consciousness you were at when you found the teachings and started applying them. And so there comes a point where you can benefit from stepping back, looking at yourself, looking at your path, and saying, what was it actually that motivated me to enter or to use the teachings of the Ascended Masters? What was it I wanted? What was my expectation? The expectation I had when I first entered the path. And what you will find if you do this is that all of you will discover that you had some kind of motivation, something you wanted to get out of following the spiritual path. And when you first found the teachings, it probably wasn't to make your ascension or to manifest your Christhood. There was probably some other motivation that you had. Perhaps seeking understanding, perhaps seeking healing, perhaps seeking special powers, perhaps seeking abundance, this or that. People have many different kind of motivation, and I'm not in any way criticizing, putting down, or even evaluating it. You have to start where you are at and use the motivation you have at the time to then study and apply the teaching. But when you have done this for a while, then you can step back and look at yourself and say, what was my original motivation? What did I expect would happen? And then you can say, based on the greater understanding I have today, the greater understanding of the path, based on the fact that I have now risen to a higher level of consciousness, and of course you need to recognize that you have risen to a higher level of consciousness. What do I now think of my motivation? Is this really the motivation I have today? Or have I developed a higher motivation where I now see that there's more to the path than I could see when I first started? There's a different goal, a higher goal that I see now that I could not even see back then. And the reason this becomes important is that if you do not look at this, there will be somewhere in your four lower bodies an internal spirit, a matrix, a momentum that is still carrying that original motivation, that original expectation. And after some time, what can happen to some students is that they are now actually beginning to realize that their original motivation was not the highest possible. In fact, it was unrealistic because it was a motivation that wasn't based on the reality of what the path is about. And so, in some part of their being, they recognized that their original motive and expectation was an impossible dream that cannot be fulfilled. But since they haven't looked at that internal spirit that is still holding on to that expectation, waiting for it to be fulfilled, they cannot resolve it and let it go. And so there will be that spirit that is beginning to feel discouraged or disappointed or dissatisfied because it is also feeling or beginning to doubt that the original expectation will ever be fulfilled. And so it can come up with all kinds of thoughts and doubts, and of course the dark forces can use it to project doubt into your mind. Does the path actually work? Is it really true? Does it work for me, or does it only work for others? Or does it only work for very few? Are there those who are so special, but it doesn't apply to me? And all of these things that can come up. You probably all have some version of these doubts projected into your minds. And so what you can do is you can look at this, the original motive, the original expectation you had, and then you can see, is it realistic based on what I now see, what I now understand, based on what I have experienced, based on the fact that I now see a new goal, and therefore really already have a new and higher expectation. And then you can look at that original spirit and you can recognize that it is still there. And when you look at your particular personal motivation, you can see why it was either unrealistic or perhaps immature, perhaps incomplete. And you can come to that point of resolution where you just realize, but I am no longer looking at the path this way. Why should I expect a certain outcome of the path when I now know so much more about the path? And then you can allow yourself to actually go into that spirit and consciously dismiss it. You may say, get thee behind me, Satan, or simply, I don't need you anymore in my life. You can, of course, make the calls for this when you become aware of it, to the whatever masters, Astrea, Archangel Michael, or myself, or any other master, to dissolve the energy behind it. You can call to us to help you see the spirit, to see the expectation you had, and to see what that actually says about how you looked at the path back then. Why is this important? Well, it's important for yourself because obviously when you have that internal spirit that is holding on to a motivation that is no longer really relevant to you, you have a division in your psyche and it will pull you back. But it is also important because most of you, before you came into this lifetime, had already reached a certain level of the path where you were not exclusively working on your personal issues, but you were willing and able to take on certain collective issues. So many of you chose to be born in a certain environment whereby you took on a certain expectation about God, religion, spirituality, that is one of these patterns that are in the collective consciousness. There is, of course, a spirit or a beast behind the pattern, but you chose to take this on so that by raising yourself above it and resolving the consciousness, the belief, the expectation, you could help raise the collective consciousness. And of course, until you have raised yourself above it, you haven't actually raised the collective consciousness. And so you can now take this further and realize that this is why I say that ascended masters are like used car salesmen, because when we give a certain teaching, we are looking at a certain group of people, and we are looking at where they are in consciousness, what kind of teaching are they ready for, what are their expectations, what motivates them. And we know that in order to attract these people to our teaching, we have to give something that appeals to the motivation they have right now at their present level of consciousness. But we also know that this is not the ultimate understanding about the spiritual path and the path to the ascension. And that is why we know that we have to bring people in and then gradually give them a higher teaching so that they can adapt and accelerate themselves and switch their consciousness and gradually raise their motivation so that they realize that what brought them into the teachings was what they could handle at the time, but now they are actually ready for something that is much more, because they now have the greater understanding of what the path is about. And when you resolve the original expectation, you do not feel disappointed, you do not feel cheated. You actually recognize the need to take this approach on a planet like Earth, and therefore you simply say, what is it that the Masters want to give me now? What is it that I'm ready for now? But you can go even further with this, and you can recognize something else. In the criminal system of many nations, such as the United States, law enforcement officials attempt to categorize criminals based on what they call their MO, or their modus operandi. This is because they have discovered that criminals are often creatures of habit. And when a certain criminal has committed one crime, he or she will tend to commit later crimes in much the same way. So when they hear that a certain crime has been committed, where there is some particular MO, they can often know which criminal is likely to have committed it. And so they can go and find out where that person was at the time, and they can often apprehend a criminal just based on this. Now, you are, of course, not criminals, my beloved, but all people have what we might call a psychological MO. And we have, of course, talked about this before in terms of the ego, in terms of internal spirits, but I'm simply giving you this from another angle. And what I'm asking you to do here is, not necessarily right now, but as you come home and process the experience you have had at this conference, I'm asking you to mentally step back and look at, how do I relate to the material universe, to the matter realm? What is my MO in my interaction with the matter realm? What are my expectations? What do I think can happen or cannot happen? What do I think should happen or should not happen? And if you are willing to do this exercise, perhaps sometimes asking for our help if you like, then you can come to see that when it comes to relating to the physical world, you have a certain MO. And in certain situations you encounter in the physical world, it is as if you are triggered into going into that MO, that reactionary pattern. This messenger mentioned that he rarely gets irritated, but he did when he was dealing with a Russian visa or when he got a parking ticket. And so this says that he has certain expectations about what should not happen to him in the physical universe. And when something like that does happen, instead of looking at the situation the way he looks at most other situations, instead of remaining non-attached, without even realizing it, he goes into a particular emotional reaction. That this shouldn't have happened, this just isn't right, and he should be able to park outside a store for 10 minutes without getting a ticket. And my beloved, the expectations may be reasonable enough, but the reality is that this is actually limiting you in your relationship with the mother realm, because you are taking certain conditions in society, certain conditions that are either man-made or are created by the fallen beings, and then you are projecting, you are creating an expectation based on these conditions, and you are projecting upon the mother realm that this is how the mother realm is, and this always happens. And what does it do? It prevents you from following the teachings that Saint Germain gave, because you cannot accept that something higher is possible. You are actually becoming, what we have said before, a self-fulfilling prophecy, because your expectation of the mother realm is what you send into the cosmic mirror. And as we have said so many times, what can the mirror do but reflect back what you are putting into it? And so you see that if you want to avoid these kind of situations, you have to look at your MO. How do I relate to the matter realm? And then you have to discover your expectations about what should or shouldn't happen. Then you have to ask yourself whether you want to carry these along with you, knowing that they can become self-fulfilled prophecies. And so it boils down to, again, my beloved, are you living in a friendly universe or a hostile universe? Are you living in a world that's out to get you? Or are you living in a world where there is at least some force that is eager to support you your growth, to support your happiness, and to help you feel good about yourself? And so, if you take the messenger's talk about him feeling that life is wonderful and having a positive expectation about the future, you may see that in most cases he does believe he lives in a friendly universe. But when it comes to applying for a Russian visa, he does not believe that the Russian visa authorities are friendly or are there to support him. And that is why he manifested the trouble he had. Grant you, I'm not saying the process is reasonable. It is quite frankly so complicated that it only hurts the Russian nation itself. But that's not the issue. The issue is that the reason why the messenger had a reaction to it was that he does not believe, at some level of his being, that Russia is a friendly nation. This partly relates to some dramatic experiences he had in a past life, but nevertheless, it shows you how you can have these MOs of what you expect. Now, when it comes to a parking ticket, well, he does not expect that certain authorities or bureaucracies are friendly and are there to support him. He has a certain expectation that bureaucracy is a difficult thing to deal with and often gives people unnecessary trouble. And in a way you could say this is correct, my beloved. But the question for the messenger is, does he want to carry this with him for the rest of his life, or does he want to leave it behind? And the question for you is, what MO do I have? What expectation of the physical universe do I have? Is it friendly? Is it supporting me? Or is there something that's out to get me? Now, I understand, of course, that this can always be confusing to people when I say something like this, because we have taught you about dark forces, and they are out to get you, my beloved. But that is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about making a distinction. You realize there are dark forces. You realize there are people who do not have good intentions. But what I'm talking about is your view of the mother realm, the material universe in general. And what I'm saying is, do not take the fact that there are fallen beings on the planet. Do not take all of the troubles they have created. Do not take that and project it onto the mother realm and say, this is how the mother realm is. Do not say that the mother realm treats me like the fallen beings treat me. We have said before, do not look at us as you look at the fallen beings. Do not think that we look at you like the fallen beings do. Do not think that we think like the fallen beings. And do the same with the mother realm. Do not put your expectations based on what the fallen beings have done onto the mother realm. Of course the fallen beings are still here. Of course there are many things going on in the world that are not right and that we are having you make calls on. But I am only talking here about your personal relationship to the mother realm, to the physical universe. Are you living in a friendly universe? Or do you think that this planet is so dark that the universe here, that the matter realm here is hostile to you? Because I can assure you that regardless of how dark the planet is, the mother realm is still more than willing to support you and support your growth, but it can only reflect back to you what you are projecting out. So if you want something different to come back, you must change what you are projecting out. It can be no other way. So now we can take this to an even higher level and have you look at what is your MO when you are relating to ascended masters. You may go back to when you first heard about ascended master teachings, and you may look at what was it that motivated you to enter these teachings. And what does that motivation say about how you saw us, how you saw your potential to relate to us or not relate to us? And then you may discover that you have certain expectations, you have a certain view of us. And many of you will actually discover that you have a view of us that is based on how a particular religion has portrayed God. Many of you have a view of Ascended Masters based on how Christianity has idolized me and put me way up there on the pedestal, way beyond your reach as the only Son of God. And of course, for most of you, this is not your own expectation. It is something you volunteer to take on in order to help raise the collective consciousness. But in order to raise the collective, you have to free your own mind from this. And you may still have some expectation, some internal spirit that you have not looked at and dismissed. And so this again relates to the bait and switch. We know what expectations people have. We know how they are capable of looking at us. So when we give an Ascended Master teaching, we must adapt the teaching to people's motivations and expectations. And we therefore present ourselves in a certain way. And those of you who are aware that over the last century we have sponsored several organizations and given several teachings, you will, if you care to go back and look at them, you can see that in the beginning we presented ourselves a certain way, but there has been a progression up through the different movements and teachings. And what we are giving you now is a higher level of understanding of us based on showing you that there is much less distance between you and us than most people tend to think. In some of the past organizations, the students had the Ascended Masters up there on a pedestal, way above themselves. And we, of course, understand people's needs. We understand their expectations. We understand that many people want to get closer to the spiritual realm, but not too close. Why is it that 1.3 billion Catholics do not want to hear my living word, but only want to listen to the Pope? Well, it's because they don't actually want to get close to the living spiritual being that I am. They don't want to encounter my being because then they would have to change. And we know also that many Ascended Master students are at a certain level of consciousness where they are open to the existence of Ascended Masters. They do want to study our teachings. They want to experience a dictation